absolute pleasure to see so many of my colleagues from all over the world, also many people, of course, from the Netherlands, all kinds of disciplines. And what I would like to do is to present to you some of the works, in fact, the program we have in mind. Karima Koutis and I myself had a discussion this morning, who is going to present the program. We tossed a coin, and at the end I became the victim, so I'm here, but I'm sure Karima could have done as well the presentation, but I'm the victim today. You see on this screen the main title which we would like to present to you today and also during these days, Cities for People. Cities are not just built environments, cities are a combination of built environment and certainly people. And the main question, of course, is, can we create happy people in happy cities? And happy people means, of course, happiness, health, economic prosperity, community sense, and many other things. And in order to do so, in the past we only had a few statistical data, income and a few other things, official statistical data, but gradually we have seen an avalanche of data, social media, and many other things. And that brought us to the idea that somehow in this new setting, we have to look much more carefully as a challenging proposition into the connection between smart and happy cities on the one hand and data analytics on the other hand. And I will start with two small anecdotal stories, just to illustrate the relevance. First, if you look into UN statistics, there we find the predictions that by the year 2050, our Earth will have at least 2 more billion people, maybe even more, but it's a minimum scenario, 2 billion in the next almost 30 years. If you just think about it, that means essentially that if approximately 75%, that's more or less what we assume, of all these people will move to urban areas, cities, agglomerations, doesn't matter, the definitions, we'll have a long discussion, of course, in itself, but they will move to urban. So it means essentially there's an enormous volume of people moving into cities. To give you an example, it means essentially that from now onward until the year 2050, we have to accommodate every year cities twice the size of Sao Paulo or Beijing. Some 50 million people every year have to be accommodated somewhere in a city in the world or in multiple cities in the world. To make it more precise within the setting of Europe, it would mean that essentially every week from now onward until 2050, we have to build a city the size of the greater Stockholm area, the size of the greater Amsterdam, every week until then we can accommodate all the people in our world. Or to be very local, every day we have to build a city the size of Den Bosch, every day, up to 2000. Then we can accommodate all these people in one way or another. Enormous challenge. Can we then still create happy people? That's the first challenge. Another one, of course, that's the second one on the list, the data analytics. Because we live in a totally different era of informatics, data analytics, and big data, etc. And I just tell you a small anecdotal story, just to illustrate this. One of the countries which sees informatization, robotization as the future is Japan. And if you look into robotics, Japan is absolutely the leading country. Now, a few months ago, I was in Japan, and it was interesting. There was a nice gathering like this, and halfway all the discussions, a robot enters on the stage and starts to talk. And the robot tells us that by 2050, almost everything in Japan and in Tokyo will be robotics. And they showed us all kinds of 3D pictures how robots would move around, which was fascinating. And then he said, thank you. And all the Japanese started to applaud. So they started to applaud for a robot. And there was no human being, it was just a robot. And then the robot replied. He said, I did not expect an applause, but thank you nevertheless very much. So that's, the type of human-machine interaction which we will see and where cities and informatics and data analytics in the longer run will, of course, play a role. And rather than being passive and say, well, what will happen? It might be much more interesting to look into the question, how can we be proactive? And that's why I love this place of JETS, thanks to the leadership of 2 universities, the city and the province. This has materialized, and this is a unique source for doing things. Having said this, by way of introduction, just quickly will take you to a few things. I'm not going to discuss all my slides. They will be sent to all of you, so don't worry if I go quickly through a few things here and there. But what we have in mind is, of course, first look into the conceptualization and operationalization of city and urban intelligence in a general sense, and also it's also about the people. So it also means we would like to contribute to sustainable development goals as they have been formulated by United Nations and many other international bodies, because somehow we have to find a joint future. The future cannot be dictated by this beautiful city. The city cannot be dictated by any other city. It has to be a common future. So that's part of the challenges. And so, in fact, what we are after here is some sort of a dovetailing of 2 types of megatrends for the future. On the one hand, an avalanche of many, many data on neighborhoods, happiness, many things. And of course, at the same time, we have this worldwide urbanization. And there is where the 2 things come together. And somehow we have to give an intellectual policy response and research response. So the key question has been formulated here: how can pluriform spatial big data and smart digital information help create sustainable cities and attractive neighborhoods, public spaces now and in the future? A very ambitious question, of course, but if we don't have the ambition, we won't solve the issues. And the real issues are there, and if we don't solve them, we might be in deep trouble. So the scope, I just would like to quickly refer to a recent book published by Philip Blom, in Dutch, Wat op het spel staat, in English, What is at stake. And he signals 2 neglected megatrends in our world over the past half a century. First, we neglected seriously the far-reaching effects of quality of life issues and climate change on the one hand, and we have neglected the rapid pervasiveness, penetration of ICT digital technology. So the 2 things of a sustainable society and data avalanche in one way or another come together, and they have to be combined and they have to be shared with the academic community. And well, of course, in our modern cities, these 2 things come together. And what we see is, in one way or another, the policy response has been rather straightforward. We should have smart cities. Well, could be, but as long as we do not know in operational terms what it means, does it make our people more happy, and does it increase the democratization of society, etc., it does not help us very much. So a critical review of all these concepts is absolutely necessary. And of course, there are a whole range of questions to be answered. They have been discussed in the previous days at all these kinds of sessions we have had here in a very creative and inspirational setting. I'm not going to discuss all these questions, but just would like to alert you to some of the fundamental things to be discussed and which will be discussed also in the future of this program. So as I said before, on the one hand there is data analytics as trend 1, and the other one is, of course, city formation, urbanization, including housing and many other things. I cannot resist tell you a small story. Max Euwe. I guess most of the Dutch participants will know this name. Max Euwe, he was a mathematician, but he was a chess grandmaster just in the years before the war. After the war, he started to continue as a mathematician, and then he was appointed, and Emil Aarts will like that, he was appointed as a professor in automatic data handling at the University of Tilburg, and later also at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. And I happened to be one of his students in that period, in the 1970s. And I remember his opening address, which was, of course, almost a national scandal. Because he said, well, you have to know by then, I think, 1 complete floor almost of the Erasmus University, they had installed a big computer. And it was huge, and only a few professors believed in computers, the rest didn't believe in computers. And so he became a professor in automatic data handling, and in his opening address he said, well, you see, this is the beginning. We have to bring in pupils, young kids, into this computer room and tell them how to handle a computer. Well, hardly anyone could handle a computer. So it almost caused a scandal. How can a smart professor tell us that we should bring in kids, even though when 95% of academia was not interested in computers at all? Well, nowadays, if you look at kids, they have this machine, and that machine has a higher capacity than the biggest computer we ever had in Erasmus University. So things have completely changed, but it was radical. It's almost the same if nowadays some medical person would stand up and say, listen, you know, in a medical hospital, an MRI scan is a multi-million project. If you say, well, every household needs to have an MRI scan, you say, well, you are crazy, it's too. But that was the type of, let's say, technology leap which suddenly was foreseen, and a few generations later, we know that this has happened. So that brings me to the question, if we are living in such a data-rich environment, and this went a little bit too far, we need to look into the question, how can we structure these data? I would like to refer you to a program which by then, many years back, was subsidized by NWO. And I'm so glad the chairman of NWO is here, because that was an interesting, it was called Untwinkling the Stars. Untwinkling the Stars meant essentially the stars are beautiful and they are so kind, they twinkle. Very nice, romantic feelings. Stars do not twinkle. Stars are just a source of light, and that's rather stable. Why do they twinkle? All kinds of disturbances, atmospheric disturbances and many other things. That's why they look so nice. But then you have to find out what are the intervening factors. And that, of course, calls for very substantive research. Now, in fact, the same with our data analytics in cities. Huge amounts of data, chaotic information. Public decision makers, mayors, who simply do not use official statistics anymore, but if they look at social media, they take a decision ad hoc based on all kinds of unverified information on social media. We have to learn how to untwinkle the stars if we are living in a big data environment to make our cities pleasant and balanced. And some might say, well, you need a structured view on the city. Yes, you need it. Because a few years ago, I have to make a personal confession, by the way. There's quite some strand in the social science which says, out with any theory. We don't need theory anymore, because if we have mapped out all of you, and we know everything, why do we need theory? Because we know it all, there's no theory necessary. And I also, for a couple of months, have advocated that message, but now I've come back, and I still think I can only understand the world if I have at least some sort of a concept of the world which is based on theory and verified by data. Even the data could be chaotic, but that's the challenge we have to face. So, in fact, and that's also good news, I think, for JADS. Recently, we were at the World Bank, and Josh Engris is one of the well-known economists from MIT, who has recently written a book on mastering metrics. He had made a very interesting observation. He had used machine learning techniques to scan all the literature in the social sciences over the past 20 years. Well, all, but many of them. To find out whether there were changing trends in research in the social sciences. And indeed, he came to the conclusion that in the 1990s, so the machine had to find out which of the millions of articles were applied or non-applied. Then he found out that by the 1990s, most of the research in the social science, in the broad sense, was almost 40% of all the world publications. And nowadays, it's 60%. Much more applied research, less reflective research, less survey research, etc. Much more applied, sophisticated research. Data analytical research. And I was very happy to hear that result, because that's exactly what I've put down here, the raison d'etre of JETS, because data analytics is at the heart of JETS. So we are supported here also by some of the empirical findings from the literature and from well-known scientists. I'm not going to discuss any further at this moment the smart new urban world, because I've already made this as an introduction that has been extensively discussed in these days, and so there is no reason to go extensively into it, except for one thing when I have said we need also a conceptualization of what is a city, what is an urban area, what is an agglomeration, what are twin cities and what have you. Somehow we need to have a design principle. Karima has yesterday presented this work on blowing up the city, and what I would like to do is just quickly show this to you. If you have, this is a city which has many kinds of components, economic capital, social capital, well, whatever, it doesn't matter, any structure equation for a dynamic city. Stepwise build-up, that's the first concept, the first structural view on how we have to look at human settlements. But of course, how to get to that view. And if I'm not mistaken, yes, let me try to use this, because this is what in fact is blowing up the city. You blow it up in different systematic components, so sort of a deconstruction, different systematically connected elements, and then gradually you have to rebuild it. So the art of a scientist is not only to use data, because data you can always use with data mining techniques, but you have to use them in an ordered, structured view supported by concepts and theories. So gradually, this is also what we would like to bring in our program at JETS, keeping the theory, conceptualization alive, but combining it with chaotic big data. And the only way to create chaos in order is to have at least a structural view. So that's more or less what we had in mind. And of course, that is important also for the future of our world, the urban future as well. Just to give you an example of a few of these data-rich types of studies, which gradually become more and more popular. One thing, urban buzz. We use recently quite some Foursquare data. Foursquare is a platform often used by young people. They would like to meet somewhere and they just check in, and then you know where other people are going, so you can find your friends, etc. Facelift operation where you can Facebook information just to get the expression of citizens, etc., and a whole range of different things. So just 1 or 2 more minutes, then I will stop. I'm an obedient person, Arjan. But just as an example, a Tesla is not a car. A Tesla is a data machine. It maps out your behavior. And by coincidence, it's mobile and it does a few other things to take you from A to B. But a Tesla is a data machine. And the same for your home. Is a data machine, has many computers, it's a data machine, everything has a computer. The city is a mega data machine. The city is, of course, for humans, but it is a mega data machine. Human beings are becoming a data machine. Robots, everything is mapped out, and to find within legal frameworks the real social science, humanistic types of elements is, I think, a very great challenge. And being a very important, an obedient person, I wanted to talk about Haigestan, we don't do that. And here I just mentioned this one. We had a dream. And the dream, with the great support of all of you, would be the following. We would like to create a worldwide academic breeding place for city and smart city concepts. From a human perspective, not that much, of course you need the technology, but mainly from a human perspective. Of course, we also would like to act as a societal and policy service house for city for people strategies. And finally, of course, also acting as and becoming a catalyst for modern urban data analytics and statistics. Thank you very much.